The Secret Service facing its biggest crisis in decades after the near assassination of former President Donald Trump. Lawmakers are scrambling to hold emergency hearings and demanding testimony from the Secret Service director. One Republican congressman who spoke with us earlier today went even further.
And there was a complete breakdown of communication all the way down the line. And so that starts at the top. The head of the Secret Service needs to go. That is obvious, but I doubt that will happen.
Here now is former acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf. He's also the executive director of the America First Policy Institute. Chad, great to have you on. First up, you've had a lot of time to digest what's happened. What are your observations with what you know at this moment?
Well, thanks for having me. Look, I think at the end of the day, this is a complete security failure. Anytime that you have an individual within 150 yards of the president, a clear line of sight, something has not worked correctly within that security protocol that they have there. So why wasn't that facility within the security perimeter? Is it because of a lack of resources? The protocols that we see surrounding President Trump or what you would normally see for a former president. But President Trump is not the typical former president with his court appearances, his rallies, the threats against his life and others. And so I think what we will find is that the Secret Service is probably not resourced the protection detail for the former president and all the different appearances that he's been doing.
Chad, we should point out that Secret Service falls into the rubric of DHS. So it's great to have you on because you were overseeing Secret Service during your time there. I can recall being at presidential rallies, whether it was Mitt Romney or George Bush or Barack Obama or Al Gore or Bob Dole, Bill Clinton, anytime that they were having a rally outdoors and there was a structure nearby that could give a potential shooter an elevated position, there were always, if not Secret Service uniformed officers, partnered with local law enforcement. For example, I remember one rally, I think it was a Mitt Romney rally, where there was a multi-level parking garage across the street. There was a police officer on every floor of that building just to make sure that it was secured. So you had buildings that were only 400 feet away from where the president was speaking, and there was nobody there.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. Look, this is a failure. So that's a private building. Was the owner and operator of that building notified beforehand and indicated that they would place a law enforcement officer in that building or on that roof or in that stairwell? A lot of different things going on here. That line of sight issue, right? Normally you would see some type of vehicle, some type of large semi-tractor trailer or a flag hanging between any type of structure and that line of sight to the president. You didn't see that today. Why is that? Is it because of lack of resources? Were they requested? Were they denied? I think that should obviously come out in the investigation, whether it's that the Congress is doing or that the president has talked about an independent review. All those things need to be answered. And I think the American people are frustrated about this. They want to see some accountability. And that's what I'm most concerned about. What we haven't seen in President Biden's tenure here is any accountability for any official when things go wrong. And clearly something went wrong here. I think the investigation needs to be swift. It needs to be quick. It needs to be transparent. And then there needs to be some accountability.
Well, we just had this briefing. It happened a short time ago for the convention where Secret Service says they're not making any changes to security measures because of what happened yesterday. They believe that they're fully prepared and no need to make changes. In fact, there was a question, even though they would not answer any questions about what happened yesterday, the assassination attempt, they did take this question on resources, to your point, Chad. They asked, have you had the resources you need? It was past tense, so I don't know if this was a question about yesterday, but most definitely about the upcoming convention. The response was yes, we are fully prepared and have a comprehensive security plan in place, and we are ready to go. So if there was a moment where they could have shared that resources were tight or not being made available to them, or it was a challenge, it could have been said there.
Well, it certainly could have. Look, I saw a little bit of that press conference, and what they talked about is obviously the security in Milwaukee on the ground for the RNC. They didn't address what occurred yesterday, so I think that's a missed opportunity. That's what most Americans care about today. I will say that the RNC is a national security level event, and with that designation comes a different set of resources than you would likely see at a rally or other things. So that's probably what the individual that was giving that press conference was alluding to. That they have a different set of funding and they have a different security footprint than you would normally see at an event like we saw yesterday.
So after the shooting of Ronald Reagan back on March the 30th, 1981, the Secret Service protocols for how you enter and exit a building completely changed. Reagan had been walking out in the open from the Washington Hilton to his limousine. That's when he was shot. As of that day, everything changed, and then the limousine would pull into a covered area, and the president would never be exposed outside. There's going to be a lot of campaign rallies between now and November. How do you expect things will change going forward?
I think you're likely to see a lot of more protective measures, right? You're likely to see a lot more bulletproof glass and other measures that the Secret Service has, and we see them deployed from time to time that protect the president. I think you're going to see a lot more agents on the on a site like that, and a very more visible law enforcement response. I think you'll see perimeters expanded. I think you're going to see a whole number of different changes, but I think this is really, really important. We shouldn't take an event like occurred yesterday to make these changes. These are things that Secret Service, that DHS and others should have been thinking about in advance, given the public nature of President Trump and how he runs the campaign and what he's been involved in the prosecutions that have been against him for the last 3 years.
As I asked one of our security professionals last hour, I'm amazed that there just wasn't like a drone by the Secret Service. I mean, I can barely go to a barbecue or a concert anymore where there aren't drones everywhere. It's surprising to me that that's not more of a resource for them. Chad, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Chad.
Thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.